in our country in a long time happened last Thursday morning with the stabbing of innocent people, including 3 young children and their carer. And our thoughts and prayers must remain in particular with a 5-year-old child who remains in a critical condition, and of course with her family. And that was the worst thing that happened last Thursday, by a mile, far worse than the violence, disorder and vandalism that took place later that day, appalling as it was. We need to keep that perspective, because the safety of people is always more important than the safety of property. And it's the safety of people that should be the lens through which to examine the statement and utterances, indeed from the Gardaí, the Taoiseach and the government in recent days. Frankly, I don't need to know whether terms like lunatic, far-right and hooligan are in the Garda Commissioner's vocabulary. I don't need to hear the outrage. I want explanation of what happened and reassurance for the future. Why were the Gardaí unable to prevent arson and looting at first? How could some of their own members have been endangered in the way that happened? Was the time it took to get control of the situation reasonable? What do Gardaí need for the future to deal with these threats? More personnel, more resources, if necessary more laws. I agree that the strongest measures of law and order are required in response to the thuggery on the streets. But many people in Fine Gael in particular must be worried that their party in government has lost touch with the concerns of ordinary voters and gives the impression of being more interested in closing down public debate and in cancel culture than in keeping people safe in practical ways. And Fianna Fáil isn't immune either, because migration is part of last week's story. There are concerns now about whether we are managing it in a way that identifies and deals with that small number who may come to our shores with mental health problems or extreme ideologies, perhaps exacerbated by past traumas. At the same time, a Brazilian immigrant who put his own safety at risk and perhaps saved children's lives last week did more to exemplify the nobility and courage to which all Irish people should aspire, and reminded us that we should be generous to migrants because we may be entertaining angels unawares. The events of last week do not point to the need for vague and imprecise hate speech legislation, which undermines democratic rights to speak, and the government must step back from any opportunism here, any temptation not to waste a good crisis. Because if there was incitement on social media, and there may well have been, it was incitement to violence, and that's where the trouble is. And these distinctions matter, because the government seems to want to avoid the discussion about how people are to be kept safe by pretending that if you can silence enough awkward questions and viewpoints, the problems will go away. We'll have a better Ireland when we're generous to migrants, but when people also know that they can keep their government's feet to the fire so that everyone can feel safe. And free speech for our citizens is vital for that. So there can't be any elitists talking down to people about what topics they may discuss and what topics are forbidden. That doesn't work in a democracy. It only pushes things underground. It stores up problems for the future. And that is part of the story of what we are living now. So I do not want to hear more talk from the government, any cynical use of this current crisis to push through vague, imprecise and dangerous hate speech legislation.